Okay, well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Don't know what time it is once again, but hey, welcome to the hearUSout podcast. This is our 5th episode. We hope you're enjoying the journey so far. It's a podcast that we discuss and mull over all things youth work, and we're here to do the same thing again. And we've got a really interesting issue or topic, very topical, I would say, today to discuss. And that's mental health with regard to young people. We're going to be delving more into that as the podcast episode unfolds. But once again, my name is Nesu. I'm the Youth Engagement and Content Coordinator at Urban Saints, and I'm joined by Paris, who's the Digital Outreach Coordinator. And we are, just overjoyed to continue journeying with you guys on this youth work journey. But before we delve deeper into this, I'm just going to hand over to Paris.
So welcome back, everybody. We hope that you've joined us again from our previous episode. We're going to just go into our show us segment. Now, this is a segment where we just want to share with you something interesting or exciting that's been happening in our lives, something that we want to share that we've been loving. So Nessie, what have you got for us this week? Kick us off.
Right. So I've got I don't know if it's a story. It's more like an observation and a cool conversation. So I was on my way to Scotland just to have a couple of days off, celebrate something with family. And I was sitting on the train next to a man who, an elderly man. And we were just talking about various things. And as we were in the train, we were looking outside. And then he pointed out what I now know as the Angel of the North. Now, obviously, for people who are resident in the UK and native, then that might be something that you think, oh, we all know that and all that kind of stuff. But for me, who's not from this country, that was news to me. I didn't know what the Angel of the North was. In essence, for some of you who don't know what it is, it's a contemporary sculpture that was made by an architect in 1998. And it kind of stretches out like this. It's not like the thing that's in Brazil, in Rio. I can't remember what it's called.
I know what you're talking about. I don't know what it's called though.
Yeah. But it does stretch out like that. So it's very interesting. Just an interesting sculpture. It cost £800,000 to make. It's just interesting that people would invest so much money to that. But anyway, that's my story. That's my little anecdote for today. For today. So. Yeah, what about you?
I've not heard anyone speak about the Angel of the North for like years. So like just bringing that image to my mind is that's a good one. It's quite impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really interesting.
Okay, well, mine is less impressive, I would say. Mine is a food item. Now, the packet I'm going to show you, it is empty because I did in fact eat it this morning. So I'm going to show you the packet. For those who are Caribbean, for those who are Jamaican, you know all about spiced bun, okay? And it's a very beautiful delicacy in my eyes with a little bit of butter. If you haven't had a full breakfast, that with a nice bit of cup of tea with maybe an iced coffee or something is a treat. So yeah, if you're passing by a kind of Afro-Caribbean shop and you want to try something new, spiced bun is my recommendation.
That's a good one. That is a good one.
Have you ever had it before?
Do you know what I had? I had the bread. What is it like that you can slice? And it's the same kind of, I think, taste.
Yeah, it's the same.
I had that recently. Bigger. Yeah, with butter, it goes. You can have it with cheese, right? So with the cheese, it's obviously the best
as well.
Yeah. So that's good.
All right, cool.
Cool. That sounds good. So just to be able to give a little bit of framework to this podcast, our sort of point, we're going to be talking about mental health, but our point of departure from a scriptural lens is the story of Martha and Mary that a lot of us will know. But I think it has something quite profound. We think it has something quite profound for this discussion and this topic today. So I'm just going to read that. And that's from Luke chapter 10, 41 to 42 from the ESV. It says, but the Lord, so in essence, we got this story. Jesus comes to visit Martha and Mary at their home. And Martha's doing all the prep and Mary's just sitting at his feet listening to what he has to say. And Martha gets upset. She's like, well, Jesus, have a look at what's going on. Like, she's just chilling and I'm doing all the work. What's this about? Tell her to help me out. And we pick up the story in verses 41 to 42, Luke chapter 10. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. And it's so interesting how I just feel that the urgency of Jesus trying to get her attention. He says, Martha, Martha, listen, just I'm trying to get your attention. You're distracted
Yeah.
about so many things. And I think it has something quite profound for us as we discuss mental health. I mean, this is off the backdrop of Jonathan Haidt releasing a very popular book that's all over Waterstones and within the youth work context. The Anxious Generation is something, it's a book that's very popular now, came out recently, and I would encourage everyone to have a purchase, have a buy and have a read through, but it does have something to say about mental health in this context. And so we're going to be thinking about that from that kind of point of departure. My first question to you, Paris, is when I talk about mental health, especially in the context of young people, what does that evoke? What comes to mind as we discuss that term with regard to young people?
Yeah, well, I think, growing up, young people, they have so many things to be worried about.
Mm,
They're constantly bombarded with a ton of information. They're aware of future decisions that they're going to have to make that are going to impact their lives.
mm,
Depending on your family dynamics and how much support you have, there's a lot of things that can affect our mental health. And that can make us anxious and, questioning, okay, what is my life going to come to? How do I make the right decisions? And I think in the context of young people, there's three kind of main factors. And I
mm,
think those are performance, and obviously that's based on education. We're told, you have to get a certain grade to be able to go on to higher education. I need to do well. I don't want to get left behind. So there's performance, how well you can do things, how quick do you
mm,
learn? Are you able to retain all this information that you are learning? Another factor is how you're perceived by others. What do your friends think about you? What do other
mm,
people at school think about you? Which kind of determines how you sort of behave, whether you're trying to fit in, whether you're trying to remain popular. So, what others think about you. And I also think anxiety about appearance, how you look.
mm,
Obviously, as young people, you're going through puberty, you're seeing yourself change in a variety of ways. And again, how people perceive you, how people perceive your body can be three main causes of anxiety. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to contend with for young
mm,
people, and I think it's definitely a time where they need a lot of empathy. They need to be reassured, need a lot of affirmation to support them through those kind of anxieties. Yeah.
mm, mm. I mean that yeah, that's so helpful to think about. It's multifaceted,
Hmm.
the mind and the various things that they have to think about. And what's interesting is young people have always been going through, I mean, all people have to think about their mental health. Simply,
Yeah.
what you think about and how you balance what's going on in your mind, how you navigate and how you work around or work towards certain things or trying to just find solutions to the things that you mull over and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. So everyone experiences the necessity of dealing with their mental health and making sure that they have healthy mental health, as it were. But it'd be interesting as we delve more into this pod as to discuss why we think that young people are at a particular juncture in our cultural moment and in history where the mental health discussion has definitely become louder and become more
Mm.
prominent in our discourse with in youth work.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I
Mm,
think also as well, like how young people deal with anxiety can kind of stem from how their families deal with anxiety, deal with
mm,
difficult situations. If you come from a family where if there's a tough situation that comes along and they're quite resilient, they're quite confident that, okay, this is hard, but we can overcome. I
yeah.
think that plays a factor into your mindset as you're growing. Do you feel supported, even if
Mm.
you are feeling anxious? So I think what families, wow, I'm trying to get the words out. I think depending on what kind of family dynamic we come from can often affect a young person as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. That's definitely it matters. Definitely matters.
Yeah. And kind
Mm.
of like, what kind of factors do you think have intensified the kind of mental health crisis that we see young people have had throughout the years, especially since COVID as well? How do you think things have got so intense?
Yeah, I mean, it is something, as we, as we were saying, it's always going to be something that we have to navigate as human beings, But
Mm,
over the last sort of 30 years, we've seen, so for example, the mental health .org organization, we'll put links in the tab, has said that, they said in 2021 that over the last couple of years, they've seen a rise in mental health concerns and problems within the context of young people and children, much more as they compare more than 30 years ago. So this issue has become much more prominent, much more of an issue, how young people are navigating mental health. And I think a lot has to do with um, the the mushrooming, as it were, of an online space where
yeah,
you live in a dual sort of existence, and you are able to live in the physical as well as the digital, but the same needs that you need to sustain in the physical, you can also now that can be catered to even in the online space. So, for example, your need for affirmation, your need for love, your need for community is also then being transposed onto a digital space. And the way the digital space is not the same as the way it works is not the same as the physical space, right?
yeah, of
So we've
course.
got a proliferation of apps, and social media life. People are doing life on social media, and a lot of young people, it would appear, are looking for those. They're looking to be approved, they're looking to be accepted and to do life on the online space. But the way the online space works is that we've got these short videos, that don't require as much investment. They're not as nuanced, they don't cover the sort of the human experience. They don't have the breadth and the comprehensive nature and the nuance of human experience. They can't capture that in a photo. But we've got young
Yeah.
people who are, and by and large, social media will inspire you to post your highlights and not your lowlights. So you put your best foot forward, and then if people like it, then you feel great. If they don't, then you feel really bad. It's such a
Mm,
short time frame and such a cursory way of analyzing someone's human existence. I like you, or I like your photo. That means I approve you. And if I don't, I don't approve. And you've put your best foot forward. You know what I mean?
mhm.
So the way the online space works is it's almost designed, maybe inadvertently or advertently, to shortcut the nuance of human experience. And so there's a lot more anxiety on, will I be accepted in this one photo? I'm trying to communicate all that I am in this one photo, and I'm putting myself forward for approval. And if I don't get approved, then that's a big issue. It makes you more anxious,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of the mental health kind of discourse that has risen to the fore. The need for constant approval. And the way that the online space works is that you have to keep on doing it. You can't post one photo for 2 years. You've got to keep,
Yeah.
because you live there. If you live there, you
Hmm.
need to be there. You
You
know
need
what I
to show
mean?
up.
So you have to,
Yeah.
you have to keep on showing up, and that's an anxious thing. I remember as a young person, I used to. This is I look back to these days and I think, oh, this is horrible. But I remember I have to be very sort of conscientious about what I was going to wear on that day, because I was going to take a snap and I was going to take it in the
Okay.
mirror. I had to wear my best clothes and I had to post it on Instagram. And if I didn't get like 100 likes, I'd be thinking, oh, I really bombed it. Do you know what I mean? And that's the kind of
Yeah.
anxiety that I grew up with. And now I'm thinking, wow, it's amazing to see this generation struggle with that in even more as things intensify in the social world. What about you? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's that thing of just being hyper aware of what people outside of like your real life, your real social circle are doing. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
the fact that we were never meant to know what's happening in so many people's lives. Like
yeah.
back in the day, it would be like, you know what's happening with your community, but now we're
Mm,
exposed to so much more people that,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
unheard of, really. It's not normal.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
normal to know what so many people are doing on a daily basis. And I think with that as well, because mental health is being talked about a lot more, and young people are actually sharing their anxieties and things like that online and having those discussions,
Mm,
which I
mm,
think can actually also trigger new anxieties. Because when you're listening to some situations and problems that other people are having or questions that they're asking, it's like it makes you think about, oh, actually, yeah, I am kind of worried about that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it exposes you to a lot and a lot of new things also. And I think another reason why it's possibly intensified a bit more is because young people are actually kind of aware more of the political climate, not even in
Mm.
the countries that they reside in, but other
Yeah.
countries. And I
Yeah.
think we're seeing a lot of young people having a lot more empathy for young people in other countries and what's happening in their country, which
Mm.
also builds an anxiety within them because they're
Mm.
like, wow, I can really see that the world has real problems and I'm a young
Yeah.
person. What can I do about it? Like, almost like we're doomed is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
kind of mentality
Mm.
that we see, especially online and with how fast information spreads,
Mm.
whether it's misinformation or if it's, true information. But even still, the exposure to that, I think, can also add to the anxiety that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that point of sort of information overload. Back
Yeah.
in the day, you didn't have young people who were privy to all the stuff that was going on in the world to the same extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
News and all the political like sort of drama and chaos. But because now the online space is an avenue for them to be able to access all kinds of information, not just about
Yeah.
people and their lives, but actually what's going on in the global political climate. They know so much now. They're so clued up on certain things, but it comes at a cost because you
Yeah.
have so many things going on in your mind. And I think that's part of them being. It's almost like they're taking too much on and thinking of and mulling over way too much for their young minds. And I think
Yeah.
that breeds a lot of anxiety in that way. I often feel like this generation, as well as young people, are a distracted generation. It's interesting because another dynamic to the whole information overload is the way that the information is being communicated. I mentioned briefly about the short form content, and I
Mm-hmm.
was reading an article by a lady called Tiara Coleman. We'll put a link in that talks about the TikTok brain. It's a phenomenon that people are talking about. This idea of the TikTok brain, the brain that almost can't last for more than 15 seconds, being programmed to look at this information and move, look at this information and move, rather than watching something for an hour and then just withdrawing. You're watching 50, maybe, I don't know how many videos you're watching per day. It just
Yeah.
clouds your mind with so much information. And what are
Mm-hmm.
the implications even for youth ministry is that we are dealing with young people who you have to almost grasp their attention immediately or else you've lost them. And that has
Yeah.
huge implications for the way we share the gospel and the way they access it, in terms of trying to make it accessible. But I want to talk about just one thing which I think kind of balances this argument, because in as much as we have a landscape that is breeding a lot of anxiety by its nature, short form content, access to social media, and all that kind of stuff. I think we've developed also as a society, in terms of how we register or how we appreciate mental health concerns and stuff like that. So, in as much as mental health issues are occurring more, we are capturing them more. So it
Yeah.
probably adds to the conversation. I was reading an article by the Guardian in April this year, and they were saying that Ofqual, the exams regulator for England, was saying that in 2023 to 2024, that exam or academic season, there was an increase of there was 12.3% more sort of approved access arrangements, special access arrangements than
Right.
4 years ago. And they said a lot of it was due to anxiety. But what it means is there's a lot more stuff that we're capturing, a lot more conditions that are now being labeled, diagnosed, and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I suppose that feeds into the whole discourse as well.
Yeah. I think with anxiety as well, we have to be aware of how that actually plays out. Not everyone that is anxious is like quiet and shy and timid. I
Yeah.
think anxiety can also manifest in other ways. Maybe someone is loud and disruptive because they don't want to deal with how they're really feeling internally. So that's a kind of
Mm,
distraction, a
yeah.
disguise. So we have to
Yeah.
kind of consider the different ways that young people are expressing anxiety,
Mm,
perhaps in ways that we're not used to or we haven't really considered before, in order
mm,
to practically see how we can help them through anxiety and get into the root of, maybe particular outbursts or displays of behavior. So I think that's something to consider, that's important as well.
Yeah, I mean, you said something really interesting, and I just want to touch on that just briefly. That yeah, that people are different even as they navigate mental health. And I wonder, because I've seen it even in my youth group, young people are not so much scared as at navigating new mental health situations. So I remember a couple of times I've had young people say, "Oh, I'm going for a test to find out if I have ADHD or dyslexia or whatever it is."
Yeah.
And it's almost become something that they're like, "Oh, at least now I will know why I'm like this." And I wonder what the
Yeah.
role of labels is
Hmm.
now in our generation. Do young people want a label to make sense of why they're feeling that way? And even if they do have the correct diagnosis, how do we help them to understand that they are more than the label?
Yeah.
Because everything starts to be viewed from the lens of I am this,
Hmm.
I have this mental health issue, therefore this is how I'm going to view the world, this is how I interact with the world. And I think that can make it can make people anxious. I've heard young people look dejected as they say, "Oh, I have dyslexia, so I couldn't do that job," or "I have
Yeah.
this." And I wonder what the role of labels plays. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's interesting because I think in some cases, like the label can be a comfortable box. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, well, at least I know I have this, but it can
Mm,
also like close the book before you've even really explored who you
yeah.
are, what your story is, if you can
Yeah.
overcome this, if there's ways
Mm,
to practically work through this despite having, this particular label. So I think, yeah,
yeah.
labels do seem to be a big factor in this conversation, I think. But then
Mm,
kind of like knowing that then as youth workers and youth leaders, how do we then approach young people who may have anxiety or may kind of have anxious behaviors in
mm.
sharing the gospel? Like, how do we interact with them?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. And I'll be so interested to hear your thoughts actually, because it's a very
Hmm.
topical question. It's really why we're discussing this topic. But I think so I'm coming back off there was a lecture that was that happened as a sort of cooperative between Youthscape and St. Mellitus. It's the annual St. Mellitus lecture, and we had a guy
Hmm.
called Andrew Root come over from the US, who's a professor. And he lectures, I think, in theology as it pertains to youth work and all that. And please do have a look on the Youthscape website when it talks about resources. You can actually access that lecture either for £5 or later on it becomes free. So it's a great lecture to listen to because it talks about some of these topical issues. But he was talking about one novel sort of initiative that was started by a group of, I don't know where they were exactly, but there was this initiative called Peel. And you can listen to that lecture for more information. But basically, he talks about the need to create an interspace. And that terminology really refers to being intentional about providing spaces where young people can experience relationships in a not so cursory way that social media does. It's not just, sort of an addition kind of thing. Kind of zero sum game. I do this, this equals this. I do this, I post this, I
Right.
get the likes, or I don't get the likes, or you know what I mean. I think it was a really interesting thing. It was this idea that you'd get to know someone. I think it was a little bit like speed dating. You get to know people, right? And you talk about various things, and then you take a photograph with them, you know.
Right.
Um, and it was really interesting. Or you write some art. He talked about the idea of getting to know someone, talking to them, and then writing a poem about them. And it was
Right.
so
Okay.
incredible what some of the young people felt as the things were
Mhm.
written about them and as they had the opportunity to write about other people. I think there was a richness and a depth and a breadth of understanding of the nuance of the human experience that came out. And it actually increased their mental health before and after. They looked at the mental health of young people before and after that kind of initiative and saw that it was better. Why? Because they probably were able to relate in, not just the highlight of their lives, but the nuance of the human. And I think we need to be more intentional about how we encourage young people to be present and to engage with each other in a way that's not so cursory. I think of our youth group, for example, one of the things we do is we don't give out the Wi-Fi password. So you have that, your whole life, you go home, you do all that kind of stuff. But when you're with us, the idea is that this is a time for you to build physical relationships. We've been
Yeah.
overjoyed as we've seen young people from different schools come and forge friendships, go to the park, do trips together. That's because
Hmm.
we make a real effort to make sure we don't it's the online space isn't bad, but we have to encourage them to spend some time offline,
Yeah, create a bit
as
of that
well.
barrier. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But what are you
Yeah.
thinking?
I think that's interesting. Like where you were saying like they had to create art or a poem about the person they've had a conversation with. And I think doing an activity like that after spending time speaking to someone actually gives you time to like process who that person
Mm,
is, maybe
yeah.
reflect on some of the things that they've said. And I think
Mm,
you're allowed to do that at a much slower pace. Whereas
yeah.
in online, if you're kind of connecting with someone or you're watching a video with someone, because you're so quickly scrolling on to the next, like
Mm,
you almost don't process. It's just, okay. It's like
yeah.
you keep feeding yourself, don't you? You don't take a second to actually digest. So I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting kind of experiment. But yeah, I think what you've said is good. We I think also as youth leaders, it's a thing of being real with our young people and maybe even expressing some of the anxieties that we have. It's
Mm,
not that we're telling young people, oh, don't worry, like you'll grow out of it or you'll figure things out, or kind of dismissing the anxiety that they have, but trying
mm,
to get to the root cause of what it is. Maybe
yeah.
there's a way
Yeah.
that we can relate and we can tell them practical steps of how we've overcome.
Mm,
Because anxiety, it's human nature, and we
yeah.
might not feel it all the time, but it's bound to come back when particular circumstances arise. So I think it's giving young people the space to express what their anxieties are and working with them to find practical solutions.
Mm,
Yeah, and I think just kind of softening the difficult thoughts that can just linger in our mind, especially if you don't have someone to kind of soundboard those to. And I think often anxiety kind of feels like an echo chamber, like it's just
mm,
your own thoughts constantly, a variety of thoughts, and you can get decision fatigue and all
yeah.
sorts. So I think having a release, someone else to speak into what we're feeling and thinking, is going to be really important for youth leaders. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? Yeah, yeah, that's it's good. I'm glad you brought that up because I think we there's a sense in which yes, we have some kind of initiatives that will help them to navigate the world a bit better and not
Yeah.
to be so reliant on a particular space. But as you said, trying to be empathetic and trying to understand and opening our ears is really important. For example, I'm not sure that just saying let's be offline is going to work. You know what I mean? This is the digital age. Even adults spend a lot of time on their phones and all that kind of stuff. So I do think we need a mix even of online and offline stuff. For example, a lot of young people are finding faith online. They're
Hmm.
finding faith online, and we need to make sure we're present in that space to be able to meet them and make sure that the content that they consume is not only stuff that points them away from Jesus, but actually points them to. So we need to be present there. But the nuance is listening and being able to say, okay, it's not entirely bad, but what are you navigating in this space? Also, spend some time in this space. Just wanted to say also another kind of initiative, which was really novel. I'm not going to say, I'm not sure, I don't know how feasible it will be in every context, but
Yeah.
I've seen, I was reading recently that in the paper that St. Albans, in the area of St. Albans, there was a head teacher who decided to try and inspire the parents within the school. And then I think there was a ripple effect to make sure that their young people didn't access phones, weren't going to get a smartphone until a certain age, 13, 14,
Okay.
15. And I wonder how feasible that is in terms of because these are the formative years of young people if they have access to so much information, and of course we know that some of the dangers of having access to that information means they can access all kinds of information in an age. I wonder whether something like that, even within a home for parents or youth settings, to try and discourage young people at certain ages spending so much time online, how that would work.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so obviously we don't want to end the podcast on kind of a negative note about anxiety. So from your perspective, biblically, how do you deal with anxiety? What gives you encouragement and what could potentially give another youth leader encouragement or a young person encouragement?
Yeah, it's interesting. A scripture that we always quote and we always talk about is Philippians 4, 6 to 7. I think most Christians will know it, don't be anxious about
Yeah.
anything. In the KJV, it says, be careful for nothing. And instead of being careful, we can be carefree, which is awesome. I always think of it in that way. But do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, present your with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace
Mhm.
of God will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So being thankful for what God has given us. Um, and in that spirit of gratitude, submitting the things that we care about and we're concerned about really helps. Again, in 1 Peter 5, I think verse 7, it says, cast your anxieties on God because he cares for you. So that imagery of, let's say you've got a backpack and you've got stones inside, and you just take the backpack if it represents the things you're anxious about, and just throwing it to God and say, that backpack is not mine, he owns it, he can deal with it, kind of thing,
Yeah.
really helps. And I think young people need to be encouraged to pray, because regardless of whether you spend online or off time offline or online, you're always going to have things that overwhelm you, and you're going to have to give them to someone who can take care of them. And
Yeah.
that is so important, for just dealing with anxiety and all that kind of stuff. But then the next verse in Philippians 4 verse 8 talks about what you meditate on. Think about things that are true, that are pure,
Mm.
that are lovely, that are admirable, whatever is, praiseworthy and excellent. And I think guarding our hearts in that way, and our minds, what we watch, and what, because there is an aspect to which we have to be very careful about what we take in, because it can make you anxious if you're always comparing yourself on social media to this person and that person and how much they're doing better than you, and like, you're going to be anxious because you're going to think,
Yeah.
I don't measure up and all that kind of stuff. So trying to limit how much, and being careful about who you follow and what content you follow. Is it uplifting or is it not? So you can
Hmm.
be on social media, but what are you following and who are you following there? You can listening
Hmm.
to music, but what are you listening to? And what are you listening to there? So I think that's really pertinent. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, for me, I think it's going to God's word daily. And I say
Mm,
this because recently I've been reading a lot of the Old Testament and the story of the Israelites and how God obviously provided manna for them each day. And it's
yeah,
a case of that daily bread. And like
yeah,
the instructions were specifically only take the bread that you need for that day. Don't
yeah.
keep it because it will spoil. And some people, they chose to take more and keep it for the next day. And they saw that the
Mm,
bread was spoiled. They couldn't use it. And God was specifically saying, I've given you what you need for this day. Don't worry
mm,
about tomorrow. Just focus about today. And he's realistic in the sense that he knows we're going to come across trials and troubles. Like we're in a fallen world, we have our carnal nature. And so
mm,
he's not saying that even if you are a Christian, he's not saying that things are going to be a breeze for you. You're going to have to trust me for the 24 hours ahead of you. And I
yeah.
think it's just that taking encouragement each day for that day and just committing the day to God.
Mm,
So I think that's something that encourages me when I'm feeling anxious about something. It's like, just deal with this day and deal with the day with God, with what He's giving you.
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think that's some encouragement for youth leaders as well, because not
Mm,
only are we dealing with our own anxieties, but then we're worrying about some of the problems that our young people are facing as well. So it's like we're doubling our anxieties, but God is there to give us peace throughout and to help us to work through difficult circumstances. So yeah, but
absolutely.
yeah, thanks for sharing that encouragement. And I hope that you guys are encouraged. We're going to
Mm,
leave a lot of resources and articles for you to read about some of the things that we've discussed to get some practical help and advice. If you are struggling with anxiety or the young people that you know are struggling with anxiety, then these resources and articles can really help you. But yeah, we just want to thank you for joining us again on another episode. We're episode we're into episode 5 now. So we're thankful for those that have joined us for each episode. And we hope that you continue to journey alongside us as we kind of open up space for youth leaders to talk and to share their authentic experiences and to encourage one another as we journey with young people. So Nesu, thank you again for joining us. And guys, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.